Calls for a higher minimum wage are getting louder, and rallies against income inequality have been gaining momentum, but a federally imposed minimum wage hike across the board may not be the answer. An article out this week in TheAtlantic.com is making the case for a local minimum wage, arguing that workers need much more to get by in San Francisco or New York than in smaller, less expensive cities. Joining me now is Richard Florida, who wrote that article. He is also a professor at the University of Toronto and a senior editor at The Atlantic. Welcome to you. It's nice to see you.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's talk about what you wrote in this article, because you argue that we need a minimum wage that reflects the different conditions faced by workers and families in cities and metro areas across the country. Setting the minimum wage above the federal level certainly makes sense, but then how do you pay for it?
Well, first of all the 50 or so large cities and metros, over 1 million people, not one, not a single one, if you set that minimum wage at 60% of the median, 60% of that midpoint wage, not a single one is that high enough to really give people, a good middle-class job. But the big issue here is what it takes to live in a place like Orlando or Buffalo or New Orleans or Memphis or even Miami is a lot different than what it takes to live in a place like San Francisco or Washington, D.C. or Silicon Valley, these knowledge metros. There, I think, we're talking about a minimum wage in the range of $15 an hour just to get people, above the poverty threshold. How are you going to pay for it? Well, the way you're going to pay for it is back when we made manufacturing jobs, those good jobs, my dad worked in a factory in Newark, those good jobs we want to bring back, we decided as a country we'd pay more for our cars, we'd pay more for our washing machines, we'd pay a little more for a TV set. Well, we're going to have to decide that all of us consumers are going to spend a little bit more for that burger, spend a little bit more for that haircut or that manicure, and it's not going to drive us broke, thus of us in the middle class. It's going to raise up the bottom and create a more equitable and better society.
Well, here's the problem. The prevailing argument against raising the minimum wage is that it's going to stifle hiring, it'll drive up the prices, so how do you counter that?
Yeah, I think that's bupkis. What really stimulated me to do this is last Sunday there was a fabulous piece in the New York Times, if people remember it, by a young economist at the University of Massachusetts. And he's done an enormous amount of work, and I actually asked him, how do we look at this local issue? And that's how I got to my piece. He and two major studies with his colleagues, like leading labor economists in the world, they found that raising the minimum wage doesn't hurt people, doesn't reduce employment in restaurant work, food preparation work, food service work, and in fact, in a new study they have coming out, it actually lifts poverty or reduces poverty by a couple, 3%. So I think, economists have long made this argument, people are going to lose work. And maybe that was true when there were a bunch of teenage kids working in minimum wage jobs. But now we have people trying to support families, working 2-3 minimum wage jobs. We've got to do for the service worker, the Walmart worker, the fast food worker in this society, what we did for the auto worker and the steel worker. If we want, not only is this important for inequality, if we want economic growth, people now talk about we have to lift demand. We need more demand to get our economies pumped, primed, and going. How are we going to lift demand? The federal government can spend as much as it wants building roads. The way we're going to lift demand is to create a middle class. And setting a wage floor that's humane and decent, $10 isn't enough. Let's say we go up to $15 and in some cases $20. That's humane and decent, and that's what our workers need to be a middle class again.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. And you look at what SeaTac did, which you, of course, mentioned in your article, raising the minimum wage for the airport and hotel workers to $15 an hour. But is that feasible nationwide?
I hope so. I hope to God our country can do this. None of us likes living in a third world nation where the 1% live like plutocrats, and I call it the 66%, not the 99. There's a third of us that are doing pretty good, journalists and media people and knowledge workers and managers and college educated. But 66% of us, that's a heck of a lot, are sinking through there's no job for a guy like my dad. 7th grade education, Italian-American for Newark, had a job in a factory. He bought a house and put his 2 boys, myself and my brother, through high school and college. We don't have jobs like that for service workers. The SeaTac is right on. If I look at that wage in that airport area is about exactly what 50 or 60% of that midpoint wage, that medium wage. If every city, and people say the mayors have to lead, right? I'm an urbanist. That Washington is dysfunctional. Mayors have to lead. Cities are the laboratories of innovation. This is something mayors can do. Mayors can come to the table and say, in New York, in San Francisco, in San Jose, in Chicago, Democratic mayors, I'm going to lift up the bottom. Bill de Blasio should make this the top point of his agenda, raise the minimum wage in New York and drive people up into the middle class. It's something we have to do.
You know, I'm going to pick up on your statement that you're an urbanist here, because I want to get to an article that you wrote in Politico.com in which it highlights an increasing number of people disillusioned by the suburban life, and they're flocking to the big cities in record numbers. Why is suburban living losing its appeal?
Well, you know, I wrote a book on this a couple of years back. I called it Not a Great Recession, Not a Great Depression, a Great Reset. And it's interesting. The Financial Times had a piece just today. It's not peak oil, Alex. It's peak car. People are going broke, have gone broke by buying that big house, you know, and they not only got to consume a lot of energy in that big house at a big gas bill, they've got to own 2, 3, and if they have kids, 4 or 5 cars. So they're getting tired of going broke, and what they want is a better life. They want, especially the younger generation, the millennials, and even the empty nesters, the baby boomers that are retiring, they want to go back to a denser way of life in the core city. But what I talked about in that article is some of the most hotly, you know, valued areas are these older urban burbs, you know, the places like Bethesda, Maryland, or Alexandria, Virginia, the places Montclair, New Jersey, close to where I grew up, and places Birmingham, Michigan, outside of Detroit, these walkable burbs reasonably close to downtown where people can live and work, and they don't have to depend on a car to do all their daily errands and to get them to work. So that's why I think the urban burbs in the cities are becoming much more attractive, and going back to the minimum wage, that's what's driving the cost of living and the prices up in those places.
Okay, Richard Florida, I bet you're a hell of a professor. I would love to take a class from you, but come on back and see us for another interview sometime.
Thanks for having me. It's great being with you.
Thanks.